Is Ciarán Browne, Assistant Professor in Conflict Resolution at Trinity College, Dublin. There's so many angles you can approach something like this, but first of all, let's just talk about, because it's about Ismail Haniyeh today, the fact that he's now not going to be involved in the negotiation process looking for a ceasefire. What impact does it have? Is it the end of ceasefire talks, or can this still continue?
I mean, it's a hugely significant moment. There's no getting away from that. I mean, what has happened here is you have literally assassinated the guy who was leading the ceasefire negotiations for Hamas at a time when they were at a very delicate stage. There was optimism that there was going to be some kind of breakthrough, and then all of a sudden this has taken place. So it should give you a good indication as to how serious the Israelis are when it comes to making a ceasefire or making the ceasefire.
Could that be, though, a power move by Israel to try and strengthen their hand in future negotiations?
Look, it remains to be seen. Who knows what the move is? I mean, all evidence up until this point leads us to the conclusion that Israel is escalating as opposed to de-escalating. I mean, you think about the ramifications of this, setting aside the fact that there's been a genocide ongoing in Palestine, in Gaza, for over 300 days, the sheer destruction that is taking place in the region, across the West Bank as well. What is happening there? Let's not lose sight of that as well. This is really, really significant. And of course, then you have over 100 Israeli hostages being held captive in Gaza as well. So where is the energy being poured into trying to find some kind of breakthrough here? It seems it's not going to happen. So we need to get cool heads in to try and do something quick.
You're an expert in conflict resolution. So if you look at the way, trying to be objective, you look at the way that both parties, Palestinian officials, Hamas, Israeli government, how they have behaved on both sides. What is the message that you have got from the way they behaved in terms of how much they want to resolve the conflict?
Well, I mean, I look at this way beyond October the 7th. There's a long history here. This didn't just start overnight, you know what I mean? Like, Palestinians have been occupied. Palestinians have had land taken away. Palestinians have been ethnically cleansed from the region for over 70 years. So we need to stop, thinking this just started on the 7th of October. If you want to make a genuine peace, if you want to really change the reality on the ground here in Palestine, you need to do things like break the siege. You need to end a siege being placed on the people in Gaza. You need to end the occupation. You need to end the apartheid regime. You need to create those conditions, then to talk about serious peace, because there hasn't been real serious peace negotiations ever in this region.
Has that been proposed by anybody apart from Hamas at any point?
Everybody who's engaged.
I mean, well, I'm talking about the Israeli, the US, and their side of the negotiation.
Well, I mean, anybody that knows anything about peace building in this region knows that it has been very much a mode of containment. It's been a way of kicking serious decision making down the road and not having to deal with really serious issues like the right of return for Palestinians to come back, the right of return for Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed from their lands in 1948 to return to Palestine. Then you need to have conversations around reparations, repair, justice, all these things that, we'll have to figure out at some stage in the future. But let's not lose sight of this. There's never been an honest broker for peace building in the region. The United States has never been an honest broker. And what we have seen in this particular moment is the United States facilitating what's taking place.
Is there nobody out there who's genuinely independent? Does politics always slant and bias a country's role?
I mean, there's a sort of a sense that we always look west on this a little bit. I mean, South Africa, for example, has led the charge when it comes to international criminal justice. We saw that before the ICJ in January. We've seen them trying to advance that conversation. And there will be other regional players that will be trying to facilitate dialogue and discourse and bring this to an end. But one of the real tragedies as well for the Palestinian people is that the Palestinians have always been talked about, talked for, or talked at. You make peace with the people who you're fighting with. So we have to make sure that the Palestinian people are leading the conversations on the ground and not being told what their future looks like.
I feel like the scenario we're discussing looks very different to people who are sat at home around the world, people who aren't involved in politics. It's very different from the people who are too close to it, the politicians who've been entrenched in this phase, because people at home are sitting and watching and seeing dozens of civilians dying in this conflict. It's really got nothing to do with them. Israel says it isn't targeting them, but they're still dying. More civilians, I think all the information you look at, more civilians dying than could possibly have been members of Hamas. And Israel seems to be okay with that. So for people at home, this seems like a kind of stage of insanity that it's being allowed to continue. But the politicians seem to be accepting it. How is it possible?
Well, two things. One, thousands, not dozens. That's the first thing I would say.
Per day, I'm meaning.
Per
but
day.
yeah,
Okay,
collectively,
fine.
yes.
Overall, we're talking
close to
crazy.
40,000.
And if you believe those figures, but also, I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact as well that since the 7th of October, millions of people have been on the streets seeing what's been happening and calling for an end to this. Millions of people. You have had a whole awakening of people who are fed up with what is taking place in the region, calling on our governments to do more to bring this to an end.
Why aren't they doing more?
Well, they have interests, don't they? All governments have interests. They are, it's up to us to keep pushing them to get them to do more,
So when you see, and it's predominantly Western governments who talk about, morals and protecting democracies, and is most of that just empty words?
I mean, look at the history of the West. The West has been involved in many global conflicts, has been facilitating them, has a long legacy and history of colonising half the planet. So we'll not take too many moral lessons from Western leaders, let's be fair on this. But the serious point, of course, is that, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the UN General Assembly, for example, not the Security Council, the General Assembly, from as early as October, was calling for a ceasefire. So the West doesn't represent the world. It is there's a lot more out there that we should be looking at.
And just to mention the pictures our viewers are seeing, we understand that the Friday prayers have finished now and that the funeral of Ismail Haniyeh will be getting underway very shortly in Doha. And we're talking about the Western influence, and it does have a big part in whether or not peace gets established in Gaza, because the US has been the major kind of power supporting Israel. And when you look into the numbers of the way that Israel is propped up, I think the latest figures were that Israel receives close to $3.5 billion a year from the United States, but it's in the form of grants which oblige Israel to spend that money buying military equipment back from the United States. Now, if you look at it just in that context, and maybe it's an unfair context, it looks very damning for the United States. It looks like they're just generating more business for the military-industrial complex in their own country, and that's their incentive.
You've summed it up perfectly. I agree with everything
you've said. I mean, maybe being
there.
Spectacularly unfair,
No,
but that's
I
how
don't
it looks on first inspection.
Listen, we've been saying as well, look, this is very clearly an American-sponsored genocide of the Palestinian people. There wouldn't be this situation unfolding if it hadn't been for the American green lighting of it. Let's be real. When Biden got off Air Force One and embraced Netanyahu on the concourse and said, away you go, that was the green light. And we've seen up until this current moment that the Americans are not prepared to turn off the tap when it comes to providing arms and ammunitions. These are American bombs being dropped on Palestinian lives.
I mean, the argument wasn't it, originally from America, that they were helping Israel defend themselves, but they're not defending now, are they? This is all out attack.
Yeah, do you defend yourself against the colonized people? What is that type of defense? It's illegal. It doesn't make sense. If you want to really have serious conversations about a peaceful future, you need to go back to the drawing board here. You need to stop occupying land. You need to stop starving civilians. You need to stop military occupation of the space. You need to give everybody that lives in the land the same equality, the same rights, the same opportunities. It doesn't matter if you're of any particular religion. That's the reality here. That's how you build peace. You don't make spurious claims about the right to self-defense or anything else. That doesn't hold any water anymore.
If we look back a few months to the proposal that was put forward by Israel and the United States, the three-point plan, which was we stop the fighting, we exchange the hostages, you withdraw the Israeli forces. I mean, that sounds like that would be a good roadmap towards stopping the killing, but it doesn't solve the problem, does it? It takes you back to kind of where you were before October 7th,
100%.
And which people weren't talking about. It was this kind of nefarious, day by day kind of attritional oppression of the people, and that's where you would be, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you probably would. And people were talking about it. I mean, we've been talking, and Palestinians have been talking about apartheid and occupation for decades, right? So people have been talking about it, but they just haven't been heard, or people have refused to listen. So these ideas about 3-point peace plan or ceasefire plans, that's all well and good. And everybody wants a ceasefire, make no mistake about it. Everybody wants a ceasefire, but it has to be broader than that. You have to look at a lot bigger context here. And when you're talking about the exchange of hostages as well, what about the thousands of Palestinians that have been arrested since October the 7th? The thousands that have been thrown in Israeli dungeons across the West Bank, tortured and brutalized. What about them? They also deserve to be released. And what about reparations for all the harm that's been done? What about justice for the innocent civilians before, not even just since this moment, but right the way back? All of these things need to be on the table as well. If you're going to be serious about peace building and not put forward a ruse of peace, you got to have serious big boy conversations.
One of the arguments that Benjamin Netanyahu has made since October 7th is that he wants to eradicate Hamas. Presumably he means the leadership and not every last person, although he seems like he's well on his way to trying to do that. But something I realised when researching the assassinations of the last few days, if you look at Ismail Haniyeh, if you look at the alleged assassination of Mohammed Deif, you're talking about people who were born in refugee camps in Gaza back in the 60s in the case of Haniyeh. Also, if you look at Yahya Sinwar, who is a Hamas leader in Gaza, all of them born in Gaza, all of them born in refugee camps. So if you look at that, you understand that surely there is going to be a next generation of Hamas leaders right now who are living in Gaza, living in refugee camps, born in refugee camps. It's just going to be the next step, next generation of the same kind of people.
Oh, I mean, for as long as there has been occupation, for as long as there has been the suppression or the attempted suppression of the Palestinian people, there has been resistance, always. So you can assassinate leaders, you can go on this reckless campaign of trying to assassinate what you consider to be Hamas militants or whatever else, but you will not be able to assassinate resistance. It's impossible. So these actions will invariably, as you sort of pointed out there, will invariably ratchet up the resolve of people to say, well, look, I believe that the only way forward here is resistance. And that's a very silly strategy. And if you look at other global conflicts around the world, there are plenty of examples where assassinating leaders or attempting to assassinate leaders didn't result in the end of the structure or the resistance. So, you can't bomb an idea.
Brendan, please stay with us. We're just going to head back